Hey, it's me. I don't want to become the horror games guy or something like that, but I've had a recent peak of interest in horror games as of late. Possibly because I'm developing my own horror game, but after playing Soma and feeling mixed on it, I was reminded of a horror game that I despise with a passion. Bendy and the Ink Machine. Look, I hate this game. I hate everything it stands for, and I hate the impact it would have on the indie horror game scene. I want to talk in depth about it, not only because the new game came out and it looks pretty damn good to be honest, but because it's been a long time since I played it. Maybe I was just bad at the game or too judgmental. Maybe I was over-exaggerating back then and my hatred is unwarranted. Only way to find out is to play through all of the game. Again. Starting with, of course, the first chapter. Chapter 1. Before I even discuss the actual game itself, I want to talk about the title screen. I ain't a fan of this. It's boring and bland, and just in general not fun to look at. There's this god-awful annoying music playing the whole time which gets on my nerves, and there's a little button in the corner that takes you to a merch website. Now see, this is in a lot of games, so that's not what I'm complaining about. What I have a complaint with is that, yeah, this button just straight up doesn't work. At all. What a great start to the game. Chapter 1 starts out with Henry going back to the rundown abandoned animation studio he used to work at after his old friend and partner Joey Drew had told him to. After exploring a bit, he ends up finding a gigantic machine called the Ink Machine. Get it? It's just like the title of the game! Bendy and the Ink Machine, guys! The machine isn't active, however, and this is because pressure must be applied to it to get the ink up and running. You must collect 6 items: a can of ink, a Bendy plushie, a gear, a music vinyl, a book, and a wrench that can be found in the inky statue of one of the animated characters called Boris the Wolf. To give the game some credit, visuals like this are really cool and I honestly love them. After collecting all these items, you activate the ink machine and are attacked by what has to be one of the worst designs I've ever seen. Like, I'm not kidding, man, it's so dog shit, dog. While being chased, you escape by falling into a lower part of the studio. And yeah, that's basically the end of the first chapter. I'm not going to complain a bunch about how short it was because, after all, the first chapter originally was just a demo for the game. And for a demo, it's pretty okay. Has an amazing style and art direction too. I sadly can't say that about the rest of the game. Yeah, it goes way downhill from here. Chapter 2 starts off immediately after where Chapter 1 left off. Henry wakes up in the room with the coffins against the wall and the pentagram on the floor. You pick up an axe and leave the room. The axe is my favorite weapon in the game, and that's because I just really like axes a lot. They are my favorite weapons in games most of the time. They're just so fun. I don't know, I'm weird, I'm a loser. We all know this. After this, we walk through a hallway flooded with thick, black ink. You then run into a mysterious inky figure holding a Bendy cutout. It's supposed to be scary and ominous, but it's not. It's just kind of there and happens and it means nothing. After this, you find and flip some switches to open a gate. Not like a mansion gate, but like the type of gate you'd see on a garage. After going through this gate, Henry makes it to a room where he must fight some enemies. I'm just going to say it bluntly, the combat in this game is horrible. It is so bad. It's slow, clunky, and boring. It feels out of place and like not much effort was put into it. Also, the enemies in general are just generally annoying. They aren't a challenge and are painfully boring. After this and a bit exploring, you need to collect a pair of keys to unlock a room to turn on an ink pump to empty some of the flooding in the building. There's this pretty cool puzzle where you gotta lure one of the ink demons into a specific part of the room, then drop a box on top of him to crush him and get the item you need. After this puzzle is another puzzle, which is a good concept but executed poorly and doesn't make much sense in the game. You need to play 3 randomly generated instruments in order to open a locked door. Yeah, doesn't really make much sense in the actual game. Like, why the hell does this specific pattern open a locked door? That's so weird, and not in a good way, it's just weird. Doesn't feel grounded in this universe. After draining all the ink, Henry gets knocked out by the mysterious figure from earlier in the game. His name is Sammy Lawrence. He's a devoted cult-like follower of the Ink Demon and sees him as a god who can free us. He's introduced as if he's going to be a huge threat and a boss-type enemy, but he's killed literally a minute later after being introduced. You don't even get to fight him. Yeah, he tries to get Bendy to kill you, and then Bendy turns on him, and he just dies. He fucking gets killed. Right then and there. It was so underwhelming and such a waste of what could have been a decent villain. He had a pretty good voice too, and a pretty good concept behind him. After this, you get chased by Bendy, escape, and then the chapter ends with you running into a friendly ink creature, Boris the Wolf. Yeah, the chapter is super short just like the first one and ends with a chase scene just like the end of chapter 1. I'll give credit where credit is due, meeting Boris does pique my interest and the chase was way more interesting and intense than the one in the first chapter. But good lord man, it feels so unoriginal and bland. You did this in the first chapter, why are you doing it again? Why didn't you make the final part of this chapter a boss fight against Sammy? It's the definition of wasted potential. This entire chapter is underwhelming and boring, and you can't even give it the excuse of, well, it's a tech demo, of course. It isn't going to be long or super amazing. It's a tech demo. Because Chapter 1 was the tech demo. Hopefully Chapter 3 is better than these 2 chapters, but I doubt it. Chapter 3 opens with Henry waking up from a nap. After leaving his room, he realizes to leave this part of the building he's in, he must first get a lever from Boris the Wolf. He's the best part of this entire game, I'm telling you. He'll give you the lever if you make him some soup. Okay, look, I'm a mega fat loser, but dude, I just love this shit. Collecting food for Boris and giving it to him, I don't know, I just think it's super cute and fun. I'm a weirdo. They could have done this part of the level way differently, and I'm glad they didn't. After this, Henry and Boris, who now joins you as a companion, must make their way through the dark and compact hallways with a bunch of machines going on in the background. It's honestly a really good part of the map. It has a good atmosphere. After a couple meaningless and boring puzzles, you meet
My God, what the hell? Oh my God, punch my mama in the throat, karate kick my daddy in the chest, what the fuck? Oh my God.
Alice Angel, another cartoon brought to life in a demonic form similar to the Ink Demon. The sequence in which she is introduced did spook me a little, I won't lie. It's a pretty well put together scene, a great opening for her. After this, we went down an elevator and then I got soft locked. So now I have to restart the entire chapter. Yay. Not to go off topic, but back when I played the game years ago, I got soft locked on the very last part, and that's why I never finished it. It pissed me off that much that I got soft locked then and there, and it was horrible. Anyways, after restarting the chapter and going through all of that all over again, Alice gives us the job of collecting items for her. This is when the chapter goes way downhill. The chapter essentially just becomes one big fetch quest, which isn't very fun. There are some combat related segments, but because of how janky and gross the combat is, the sections don't make the fetch quest any more bearable. It actually made it worse. A new hiding mechanic is introduced and it also doesn't add very much to the game. You can hide from annoying enemies who just reappear the second you leave the damn thing, or you can hide from Bendy. You'll know Bendy is near when the map becomes covered in boring generic looking black ink. It sucks, man. Also, while making this video, I had saved the game and quit it to take a break, and when I got back on, all the quests I had done had been gone. And I was also soft locked again. So I had to restart. This is now the second time for this damn chapter. I fucking hate this game. To give the game some credit, there is this one quest involving the monster called the Projectionist, which is pretty decent. Anyways, after finishing the list, Alice lets you live and your command is to return to the lift. Why can't they activate the lift? Why is nothing working? No, I got soft locked again. No! Anyways, I'm real quickly going to install a file that allows me to unlock all the chapters without needing to beat them, because I will not be replaying this dogshit chapter for a third time. A third time! The chapter ends with the elevator breaking and Alice trying to kill you, and she kidnaps Boris at the end. Or it goes something like that. I don't care. Chapter is bad. Feels way longer than it should because of how boring it is. Let's move on from this dog shit and just get on to Chapter 4 already. I don't want to talk about this piece of shit anymore. Chapter 4 opens with Henry reawakening from the elevator crash and heading out to save Boris from Alice. He does a couple puzzles where a cool jump scare type sequence happens, and then Henry makes it to a pretty cool room full of scared ink people. This scene is cool and honestly really dark. They're just crying, it's kinda sad. After this, Henry hops inside a vent, runs into Bendy once, and then makes it out of the vent to a big warehouse full of carnival games. You beat these games to unlock a door. Right after this, I proceeded to get soft locked again. Time to restart. Yay! After opening door number 2, you get thrown into a boss fight. Yeah, this game actually has a boss fight for once. It feels like the developers are actually trying. The boss's name is Bertram Piedmont. Besides Sammy Lawrence, I'm pretty sure this is one of the only times in the game an ink employee is confirmed to be an old employee of Joey Drew Studios. The boss is pretty simple and easy. You pick up an axe and destroy the gears on his arms when his attacks are on cooldown. After this, you must enter the next room with a switch in it. You have to flip this switch to unlock the next door. This room is another projectionist level, the type of level I enjoy. The room is flooded with ink. These projectionist sections have to be my favorite part of the game still. They're the only parts of the game that actually feel scary. The projectionist also fucking dies in this chapter. Bendy shows up and fights him to the death and rips his head off. It's honestly pretty sick, but it's also pretty funny too, I'm not gonna lie. After this, you enter the final room to go rescue Boris from Alice. It starts off with a roller coaster ride of sorts, then leads into a boss fight with a freakish and distorted version of the Boris we once knew.
Boris! Oh no, what has she done to you?
It's another boss fight where you must create ink weapons and attack Boris while he's on cooldown. Boris has 3 different attacks. An attack where he rushes towards you, an attack where he punches the ground, and another attack in which he picks up carts and throws them at you. They're decently easy to avoid, but they do a lot of damage if they do hit you. After killing Boris, Alice rushes at you to kill you, but before she can, she is stabbed to death by 2 new characters. A new Alice, who looks to be a lot nicer and cleaner, less evil, and a new Boris, who seems a lot more blocky. Is that a term? He looks more serious, more older, I guess. Less cartoony and goofy. And that's the end of the chapter. And honestly, it's a pretty good chapter. A lot better than chapter 3 and its atrociousness. The introduction of the ink creation device, or whatever it's called, and the boss fights are really cool. Sure, it's nothing advanced or amazing, but I appreciate the effort. This chapter also has perfect pacing. It's not too long, but it's not too short. Sadly, this will be the only good chapter besides chapter 1, because chapter 5 is by far the worst chapter of the game, and is one of the worst things I've ever played in my entire life. It is horrible. Chapter 5 opens with a long, unskippable cutscene that is boring and annoying to sit through. You get an item in this cutscene, but it serves 0 purpose in the game, so I'm not even going to bring it up. It's called like the scene tool or some shit, I don't care. After this, you need to make your way through a tunnel on a boat while a hand monster chases you. You also, while doing this, must take care of clogging in the back of the boat. It's really boring and tedious. It got on my nerves a lot. After this, you make it to an area full of enemies, one of these enemies being Sammy Lawrence of all things. It's obviously fan service, and it's really, really bad fan service. Like, it's just here, and it makes no sense. This motherfucker is supposed to be dead. After beating Sammy, the area gets packed with enemies that are incredibly annoying and hard to fight, even with Boris and now the new Alice Angel helping you. After this long and tedious fight, Henry falls through the floor and lands into yet another underground area of the studio. This happens so much, I'm just expecting it at this point. You must empty the ink in the studio by collecting ink balls and then turning them into pipes. You have to find these ink balls in a maze full of enemies. After this, you make it to Bendy's lair, his domain, the very bottom of the studio. New Alice and new Boris cannot join you though, because if they step into the ink, they'll die. They'll become a part of it. I don't really think this is because of story reasons. I think it's because the developers just were too lazy to add them into the fight, or just didn't have time to finish it. After entering the studio, a tape from Joey is played by Henry where he reveals that the way to kill Bendy is to show him the film reel called The End. Bendy then turns into a much more demonic creature called Beast Bendy. This leads into a boss fight which is incredibly bad, it is horrible. The first phase is just flipping some switches while Bendy just runs around the map, aimlessly. The second and final phase of the fight is you tricking Bendy into running into these 4 ink tube things. I don't know what they are. I think they're like the pipe things that were in chapter 3 but much bigger, but I honestly can't tell. It isn't fun. It's stupid and boring and doesn't feel like a boss fight. Especially a final boss fight for the end of the game. Anyways, you show Bendy the tape and he dies. After this, you wake up in a hyper-realistic apartment where Joey Drew is, the human Joey Drew. You finally get to meet the man behind the madness, this entire story.
Henry, so soon. I didn't expect you for another hour yet. Now you're just trying to impress me. But I know. You have questions. You always do. The only important question is this. Who are we, Henry? I thought I knew who I was. But the success starved me. Nothing left but lines on a page. In the end, we followed two different roads of our own making. You, a lovely family. Me, a crooked empire. And my road burned. I let our creations become my life. The truth is, you were always so good at pushing, old friend. Pushing me to do the right thing. You should have pushed a little harder. Henry, come visit the old workshop. There's something I need to show you.
All right, Joey. I'm here. Let's see if we can find what you wanted me to see.
I'm going to go over this when I talk about the story and characters, so let me wrap this section up with my thoughts on this chapter. This chapter blows. It feels soulless, sad, it's not even fun. It's poorly written, and it's incredibly boring. It is horrible, the definition of horrible. After beating the game, you unlock something called the Archives, which is full of all the models of the ink machine and creatures that they used in the game. All the characters are here. When looking through all of these, I feel a tad bit sad because, well, these are some really cool and interesting models that are sadly wasted on mediocre characters and a piss-poor story. There was potential here, and it was wasted potential. It was wasted potential. And I know I just repeated myself, but that's all I can do really, because it makes me sad. Because that's literally the best way to describe this entire game, but especially this chapter, especially these characters. Wasted potential. So the story in this game is pretty complicated in my opinion. Not because it's super deep or good, but because it's a genuine mess that has so many plot holes and elements that aren't even close to explained. The ink machine, the main focus of the game, the main thing in the title, isn't explained at all. The common idea that used to be followed to a T was that it uses human sacrifices and turns them into monstrous, distorted versions of cartoon characters. There was also the idea of Satan maybe being involved because of that pentagram at the end of Chapter 1 and the beginning of Chapter 2. But that idea is completely retconned at the end of the game. See, that ending basically explains that the events of the game aren't real. You're inside the ink machine's dimension that is a never-ending loop. That's why Henry sounds so disinterested and bored throughout the game. So in universe, we are not playing as the real Henry. We are playing as an ink version of Henry. But also, that doesn't make sense, because all the other ink creatures can't step into Bendy's lair without getting turned to ink. But he can? That's odd. So as you can see, that also doesn't really make much sense either. Good Alice is obviously Allison, and Robot Arm Boris is obviously Tom, yet they take on the form of Alice, Angel, and Boris. So why isn't Henry a cartoon ink creature? Why is Sammy Lawrence an inky creature and not a cartoon recreation? It doesn't make any sense. Not to mention the reveal of the whole thing just being one big loop is a total cop-out and super poorly written. The worst part about the story though is that this wasn't the way the game was supposed to go. The game was building up to an alternate ending that Joey Drew was the ink demon, and that the ink machine turns innocent people into ink monsters. This would explain why the studio went bankrupt, because the employees were disappearing. This would also explain why Bendy doesn't have any legs in his final form, and he also limps when he walks. This isn't some fan theory either. This is confirmed by a scrapped final boss fight dialogue where Henry says Joey's name as if he was shocked, as if Joey just appeared right in front of him out of nowhere. But that isn't what happened at the end. All of that was thrown out the window for this time loop bullshit. But the story could have been saved by good characters. This is why so many bad games, bad movies, bad TV shows have devoted fan bases, because the characters make the show good. Sadly, this game has no good characters though. The closest thing in this game to an actually good character is Evil Alice, and she isn't really a character. Like, yeah, in the typical textbook definition, she is a character. But she isn't deep, she isn't layered, she's not interesting. She is the typical mentally ill, insane, demonic woman who wants to kill you. It's a trope. I've seen that in so many movies, games, horror games, not even horror games, just games in general. I've seen it in TV shows that even aren't horror TV shows. And Good Alice, who's supposed to be a completely different character, is somehow just the same, because guess what? She's a trope too. She is as flat as a piece of paper. And Henry is a boring protagonist. Like, I get it, it's a horror game, first person, the story's vague. So, you can't really make a super interesting protagonist. But God, he just sounds so deadpan and bored, and I know that's supposed to be a plot detail, but it obviously isn't. The voice actor's just bad. The best character in the game is Boris, purely because he's a cool dude who likes soup. I think it's cute. I think he's cute. He could be in his own game on his own, and I'd like that. Joey Drew is by far in second place for best character in the game, purely because he actually has a story around him. He actually goes through a downfall. He actually technically changes by the end of the game. And hearing about his downfall is pretty interesting. Well, we're here. The end of the video. The very end. Look, the downfall of this game disappoints me a lot. I had bought this game on GameJolt back when it was a simple little demo. I loved it. But once Chapter 2 came out, the game began to go downhill, and even when I was younger I could tell things weren't going to get better. I feel bad for the Bendy team. I have a feeling all these many glitches and horrible story choices weren't on them. I think it was all Mike Mood's fault. But that's just a theory. Mike Mood and the Meatly did some pretty shitty things to the Joey Drew studio, or the Meatly, Beastly, Kindly Games. I don't know, their name is really confusing. I think it's Joey Drew Studios now. The shitty stuff they did is really messed up. I'll put a link in the description to a video that explains it better than I could. I sadly have to give Bendy and the Ink Machine a 2 out of 10. I didn't want to, but the game's just bad. Oh, you thought that was the end of the video, didn't you? Well, fuck you, shitlips, because it's not. There is one more game in the Bendy cinematic universe that I'd like to talk about in this video, because I do believe it's important. It's a game I had not played before until I started work on this video. I bought it specifically for this video. That game is Boris and the Dark Survival. Boris and the Dark Survival came out in 2020 and is a spin-off to Bendy and the Ink Machine, obviously. The gameplay is very different from the first game. The game is not a first-person survival horror game, but now a top-down survival horror game. Unlike the first Bendy game, Boris and the Dark Survival actually got quite a few updates from what I see. The game stars Boris the Wolf as he makes his way through the studio collecting supplies while trying to avoid the Ink Demon. Now, what I'm about to say is incredibly sad, but it's the truth. This tiny-ass little spin-off game, which was most likely made as a silly little side project, has more interesting gameplay and is overall just a better game when compared to the much bigger, 5-part game that Bendy and the Ink Machine is. Is Boris and the Dark Survival an amazing game? Hell no. It's not even really a good game in my opinion. At most, it's a decent game or mediocre, maybe above average. The art direction, gameplay, and animations are good, and much better than the first game. But the gameplay gets repetitive and isn't able to keep me interested for too long, I'd say. Not to mention that the main enemy in the game, Bendy, is incredibly annoying to deal with and not in a good way. He's always so close or so far away that you can't even tell if he's on the map. It's not spooky, it's just annoying. The game also gets repetitive after a certain point. You can't just collect the same type of items for God knows how long and expect it to be fun forever. The intro cutscene and its style is really cool. I really appreciate and enjoy the storybook-like introduction, where it's like a cool art book and it's like a storybook and shit. I don't know if that's a good way of describing it, but I hope you get what I mean. I give the game a 6 out of 10. Now you might be wondering why I decided to shove this all the way at the very end of the video when the previous section could have served as a perfectly fine outro. Well, I did this for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that I want to cover all of the Bendy games on this channel, and Boris and the Dark Survival is too short and simple of a game to be its own video. The second reason is that Boris and the Dark Survival is a much better game than Bendy and the Ink Machine. So I wanted to talk about it to show that the Bendy team does have potential. That they have the potential to make a good game. That they have the potential to make something truly spectacular one day. I like to hold out hope when it comes to creativity. I want them to listen to criticism. I want them to improve their craft from the critiques of the people who look at and consume their art. So that's why I talked about it. To show that the Bendy team does have potential. So that is why I have some hope for the newest game in the series, Bendy and the Dark Survival. Only time will tell whether or not this hope will be rewarded with an amazing game or squashed by a mediocre one. And when that time comes, I will be giving you an answer. I will play it one day, and I'll probably make a video on it. Hell, not probably, I will make a video on it. Thank you for watching today's video. Have a spectacular day, and I'll see you in the next video.